Hey everyone, welcome back. So we've talked a lot already about some of the basic chemistry of the cell. We've also talked about molecules, elements, as well as subatomic particles and how they interact a little bit so that we can get ready for these parts. And one of the important parts that we're going to talk about is how we harvest energy, right? So we're going to look at aerobic harvesting of energy. That means we're going to need some oxygen. Oops. Right? So whenever you see aerobic, think oxygen. And in this case, we're going to look more closely at breaking down specifically sugar for energy. And we're going to look at the generation of a molecule called ATP, which we talked a little bit about before. And we're going to understand it's significant in transferring energy for use within the cell. So let's start with some of the basic concepts of cellular respiration. Cellular respiration deals mainly between these two functional states. So the first is a transformative state called anabolism, and the second is a transformative state called catabolism. So for anabolism, what that is taking smaller molecules, right? And we're going to take some energy and we're going to pack them together and make a larger molecule out of it, right? So a much larger molecule that has energy stored within that bond. Okay, so we built something, right? Anabolic. So with catabolism, it's a little bit different. We take these larger molecules and we're going to introduce them to like a catastrophe in a way that releases that energy when we break that bond and make smaller molecules, right? So now we have energy and smaller molecules. And that's the cycle we use to transfer energy in the cell. So why are we so worried about dealing with energy transformations? Well, it's because in order for life to be alive, we require energy, right? We have lots of things that we need to build or repair or to otherwise break down or even just transform. So we're very, very busy molecularly. In almost all ecosystems, especially the ones we study in this class, the energy that we look at ultimately comes from the sun, right? So yeah, from the sun. And most of that energy gets trapped and entered into our system using photosynthesis. So photo means light, and synthesis is to build something from it, right? So we're going to pack in energy from light, and what we're actually going to build is sugar, all right? So some different types of organisms can use photosynthesis themselves to build sugar that they need. They take carbon dioxide from the air, a little bit of water, and energy from the sun, and they can make all the sugar they need. Those are called autotrophs. They are the photosynthesizers. Like plants and stuff, right? Like plants. I should have written that in green, right? But auto means self. And trophy here means condition of growth or nutrition, since they make their own food. Now, you and I are not autotrophs. We are heterotrophs. Right? So we need to eat someone else, right? Different things. Or unlike, right? Different from self, nutrition or growth. All right, so no matter how nice you try to be, right? And this was really tough, for me when I realized this one. It was pretty sad. It's not just about not eating other animals, but even other plants. In order for a human to survive, you have to eat other organisms required. So there's that. All right, let's move on. So for photosynthesis, one of the most important little things, these little organelles. So so I should have pointed out to you a few other videos which talk about the organelles, right? Or it's like a tour of the cell. And it talks about all the internal components, the organ-like structures of a cell, and all the things that they do. And one of the ones that we talked about, or well, that the video showed, I used the video since it's much better animations, is one of the chloroplasts. So the chloroplast is really cool. What the chloroplast does is it actually takes some of the photons that are sent down from the sunlight, rattles them around, and stores them within broken up pieces of carbon dioxide and water to make sugar, right? Little sugar rings. Other thing that's really neat about chloroplasts is they're not really an organelle, actually. They are an organism on their own. They're a type of, I believe it was archaea, but they're prokaryotic. So they're prokaryotes. They have their own DNA. They have their own internal structures. They, reproduce on their own. All these little things, and as some of the other organelles that are, well, one mitochondria we'll get to soon, they actually divide inside of the cell on their own, right? They're not manufactured by the cell. They're what we call an endosymbiont. Endosymbiont. Really cool acquisition. So in a nutshell, photosynthesis, right? So it's atoms of carbon dioxide and water. Boop, boop. Basically, we're going to get those atoms and we're going to rearrange them, right? They're going to react right here. And what we're going to make is glucose right here. So this is sugar. And that's an energy storage molecule. Yeah, slow writer, sorry. And we're also going to give off oxygen as a waste product, right? So oxygen over here. That's how plants breathe in carbon dioxide and plants breathe out oxygen. Cellular respiration is a little different. So this is how we actually break down that glucose, right? So we're going to try to break it down in this case. And the reason that we would want to break down that sugar is because we want to get energy. Right? That's great stuff. So we're going to break it down into some things that you might remember from when we talked about actually making glucose, carbon dioxide and water. We'll break it down to its constituent parts. And then remember, we'd popped a little energy in there. So we're going to take that energy out. So that's what we call a catabolic type reaction, whereas photosynthesis is an anabolic type reaction. So the cell is going to capture some of that energy, as much as it can, and it's going to charge it up in these little transport molecules called ATP, right? Adenosine triphosphate. Now let's talk about cellular respiration. That's an important term to just get right. So when we talk about cellular respiration, you probably think about respiration, right? The respiratory system, breathing in and breathing out using your lungs. Well, that's definitely part of it, but that's a large scale multicellular organism way to look at it. Okay, so that's true because there are some components that are similar, or that, well, are similar because they're related, like oxygen. Okay, but cellular respiration technically is talking about the level of the cell, right? Not the lungs, not the organism, multicellular organism, just a single tiny little, has a nucleus cell. Okay, and so it's when we take cell food, which can be a lot of different things, but in this case we're looking at sugar. Sorry, terrible spelling. Anyway, so we're looking at sugar and oxygen. We're going to use that oxygen to break up the sugar, and from it we're going to get energy, and we're also going to release carbon dioxide, right? So you know we breathe in oxygen and we breathe out carbon dioxide. Whenever we talk about cellular respiration, know this, it is aerobic, like aerobic exercise, right? Using lots of oxygen there for different types of energy. That means aerobic is oxygen requiring. That's literally the definition of it. So let's look at this in a little bit more of a conceptual way. So here's the respiratory system, right? So that's true, that's important for us, these big animals known as humans. Okay, but we're breathing in that oxygen because for aerobic, it means oxygen requiring. Okay, we need it. So we're going to breathe in that oxygen, and that's how we get the lion's share into our body, right? That oxygen is going to circulate throughout the body, and we're going to go, in this case, to muscle cells. Well, next to the muscle cells are glycogen, remember? And so glycogen is a type of sugar that we store in our muscle cells. We can break that glycogen open, and we can split it up into CO2 and energy. Whereas the muscle cells are going to use the energy, that CO2 is a waste product. Let's get it out. And that's why we expire, right, or breathe out carbon dioxide. So that's the link between cellular respiration and the respiratory system. So we just looked at the respiratory system. Oh, sorry, frog in my throat. So now that is an organ system level concept, right? So a cellular respiration type takes place in, you guessed it, a cell, which is much, much smaller. And it takes place in every single type of cell. But for us, in humans, in eukaryotes, right, like plants and animals and fungi, it takes place in the mitochondria of our cells, right? So that's only eukaryotic cells. Prokaryotic cells don't have them, right? So prokes, no mitochondria. Sorry, prokaryotes. So that means that they're going to stay small, they're going to have less complexity, and they're going to have lower levels of overall energy. We have these mitochondria, and so let's get into those a little bit more. So if you went back into Module 1, there, that's a little better. So it's Module 1, 1410, Dr. Domena's video lectures, and it's a file. You open it up, and there's between 5 and 10 little videos for you guys. Little meaning they're relatively short. And at the very bottom is one called Types of Cells. Okay, I want you to go and look at that. So what that is going to talk to you a little bit about is it's going to expand on this idea of eukaryotic and prokaryotic cells. So larger, more complex cells versus more simple bacteria-like type cells. And it's also going to discuss the organelles. And one of the ones it spends a lot of time on are these little mitochondria only found in eukaryotic cells. So eukaryotes, that's us, that's humans, as well as the rest of animals, plants, and fungi, like we said. They have mitochondria. So mitochondria, this little mitochondria here, for example, this is not just that it's an organelle, it's something really special. It's an endosymbiont, right? So an endosymbiont, spell it out, endosym. Ooh, I have to hyphenate it. Biont is this really cool thing. And what it is another type of organism that lives, it makes its home inside of a larger organism. Okay, it's known as endosymbiosis. So what happened, or like what we think happened, is once upon a time there was a little tiny, like archaea-like type of organism that was floating around the same oceans, I guess, as our early eukaryotic ancestors were. And as they were floating, we were gulping up all of these smaller life forms, and we gulped up some of these ancient mitochondria precursors. And so when we gulped them up, we noticed something. Well, I could either digest it and tear it apart, or if I just give it sugar, I actually get way more energy. It's like a cow. Instead of giving up milk for cheese and dairy products, it gives up ATP, which is something cells use a lot of, right? So we already talked about that a little bit and how enzymes work. You can pay off enzymes in cells to carry out different types of work. So decomposing things or synthesis, building new structures. So that's really, really valuable. So what ended up happening is we just decided to keep this little herd of mitochondria floating around on the inside of our cells, like making all kinds of ATP for us to use. And to this day, they still are independent free-living organisms. They have their own DNA, they reproduce on their own, and they may not have any idea that they even live inside of another organism. Shh, don't tell them. They're being useful. All right, so cellular respiration happens inside of their little bodies, mostly. There's other places that they happen too. So cellular respiration actually just happens along either side of a membrane. That's really the most important thing. But the reason these little organelles are incredibly valuable is because they have a whole lot of membranes stacked up and twisting inside of their tiny little bodies. And that membrane has got tons of the equipment that we use for making ATP within it. Okay, and that's why it's become so valuable to keep these guys, inside of our eukaryotic cell bodies, okay? So the membrane is the site of cellular respiration, and the mitochondria are the powerhouses that produce so much of the byproducts of cellular respiration that we use in order to bring up these storehouses of ATP, right? So technically they themselves are prokaryotes. They're a type of prokaryote, okay? And they also are part of a larger family, right? Prokaryote being like the largest group between eukaryotes and prokaryotes. And in that diverse group of prokaryotes, they figured out tons of ways to use the membrane in order to charge up ATP, right? So that's that. So let's talk about another idea. Another idea is that of food, right? So food calories. Have you ever noticed if you look at the side of your favorite candy bar, it says like, well, whatever yours is, mine is around 260 calories per serving, right? So 260 calories doesn't sound like a whole lot, right? And so when you think about it, a calorie is the amount of heat required to raise 1 gram of water up 1 degree centigrade, right? So it's more like that. Yeah, there you go. And so a kilocalorie is what we use when we're talking about food. So if you ever notice on the packages, they don't have lowercase cal, right? That's a scientific calorie, right? This is a scientific calorie. That's the one with the grams, up the 1 centigrade. Okay? It uses something with a capital C, right? Like that. So that is a food calorie. All right? And so that's a kilogram of water to be raised up by 1 degree centigrade. So that's the amount of heat required, right? And so that's, again, a food type calorie. So that also means, you guys, a scientific calorie would mean that my 260 calorie candy bar is actually a 260,000 calorie candy bar. Yeah, okay. There you go. Sorry to ruin your day. So now that I already disappointed you a little bit by telling you that not only does your candy bar have around 260 calories in it per serving, but it's really more like 260,000 actual scientific calories per serving, let me actually take you down one more notch. But it's a really cool reason. Okay, let's also look at how the body uses kilocalories. So have you ever noticed how some of us will eat one thing and it feels like we gain it right away? So it's because all of our bodies are actually designed to do exactly that when they're functioning healthfully. Okay, so for the most part, all of life on this planet has lived in pretty much starvation conditions. That means we really had to maximize how many kilocalories amount of energy we were able to use for different activities. So for like an hour of running, we can only use, if you're about my size, around 150 pounds, about 1,000 calories, right? About half that for a few of these other ones like dancing, bikes, and swimming, and then even less, right? So here's like what my average activity is every day. A nice slow stroll, not even burning off that 1 candy bar, right? So that's kind of good. And some good news for you, those of you who are studying, even though you're sitting and just writing, if you do it for at least an hour, you'll burn almost 30 calories, right? That's good. Okay, let's look at a few things here. So let's recap what we know about. We talked about the idea of respiration, right? We looked at the respiratory system, but that's not cellular respiration. Cellular respiration happens inside of the cell. That's right. So it's cellular level changes and reactions that take energy out of food. And it's occurring in the mitochondria, right? So the mitochondria, those little tiny organelles that we talked about. And if you are having a hard time with your organelles, please go back and review the video that I posted. It's not actually one that I did because the animations are so much higher quality. That talks about the types of cells and the organelles of cells in our Module 1 Dr. Jimenez video lectures file. So even though I didn't make it, it's the one I'd like you guys to use. It's pretty good. All right. So we went through a specific type of reaction, which took food, or in this case sugar, glucose, and then the oxygen we breathe in during actual organ level or organ system level respiration, right? Or inspiration, technically. We looked at a few, we will be looking at about 3 different metabolic pathways that are going to take us to where we can get this ATP, right? So this is that energy that was stored in that larger molecule over here. We use it to power things like enzymes for work. We're going to fix cell membranes, make new cells. We're also going to degrade cell components and protect the cell maybe from invaders or other things. We're going to let off heat as a byproduct, okay? So that's going to be that highish body temperature that we have that actually sits or almost pretty close to 100 degrees Fahrenheit, right? So 98.6. So 37 degrees Celsius. It's pretty warm. We're going to do that by using catabolic reactions, exergonic type reactions, right? So same thing in this case, or decomposition reaction. And so that's going to make a leftover product of carbon dioxide, which we breathe out, right, of the lungs, as well as some water molecules on the side. So I hope that was helpful, and we'll see you in lecture 9.